안녕하세요. 세 번째로 제가 무대에 나왔습니다. 근데 얼마나 힘드세요. 제가 이 한 시간씩 이 강의를 열심히 끝까지 들어주시는 여러분께 다시 한번 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 열심히 온라인으로 지금 라이브로도 진행되고 있어서 많은 분들이 저한테 또 문자를 주시네요. 자, 이제 세 번째 세션. 이거 좀 어려운 주제인데 저희가 한번 얘기해 보기로 했습니다. Towards the Immaterial, New Practice, Creative Ventures. 어떻게 보면 이제 미술이 정말 물질을 떠나서 Beyond the Material, 어떻게 보면 비물질의 세계까지 또 그런 것들로 미술이 굉장히 다양한 형태로 지금 여러 가지 어떻게 보면 약간 벤처식으로 나오는 지점까지 가고 있습니다. 그러한 부분에 우리 정말 오늘 또 너무 멋진 프로덕션을 만들고 계시는, 아까는 모더레이터를 했지만 이번에는 마틴 당글장-샹티옹이라는 우리 정말 아트 프로듀서 마틴과 그 다음에 정말 아시아뿐만 아니라 우리 아트바젤 홍콩 가면 누구의 디너는 꼭 가야 돼라고 말하는 정말 람 갤러리의 파운더이자 정말 오피니어네이터고 엄청난 요즘 방송 프로그램으로 아트월드를 높이고 있는 우리 또 저의 아주 오랫동안 절친 람이십니다. 그리고 우리 이번에 서울 DDP의 그 서울 라이트의 총감독을 맡고 있고 지금 서울대학교에서 처음으로 미디어 학부를 이끌고 있는 우리 박재성 교수 재박 작가가 이번 한 시간을 여러분과 함께 해주실 것입니다. 다시 한번 큰 박수로 연사들을 맞이해 주세요. 감사합니다.
We have too many mics. So I'm back. For those of you who were not here earlier today, I'm Kim Conniff-Tabor, the editorial director of the Democracy and Culture Foundation, which runs the Art for Tomorrow Forum. Once a year, kind of travels all over the world, hopefully one day in Seoul. And actually, I learned yesterday that my name means royalty in Korean, so no pressure. But I know many of you are also named Kim, so. So today, this afternoon, it's actually a really great continuation of the conversations we've been having all day, because we've been talking about it and kind of dancing around this idea of the rise of more immersive spaces, more experiential works. And we looked at it earlier from the perspective of institutions. Then after that, we looked at it from the perspective of how technology is playing a role in these kinds of works. And now we're going to kind of get back to some of the nitty-gritty of how do these kinds of works come to life. So the artist, the creator, but also the whole team that surrounds the artist and the creator to make them happen. So that's what we're going to be discussing now. And so, Martine, I want to turn to you. I'm lucky to have Martine on the panel here. And I know that Jiyun already introduced everybody, but as you can see, we have the illustrious Pearl Lam, Martine, and also Jay Bach, the artist and professor. So, Martine, in a way, you and I have been talking in the past days and months about how your own experience really follows the arc of how the art world has changed in the last, say, 10, 15 years, maybe more. You began as a gallerist in an object-based world, founding the Thomas Dane Gallery, and you were on the art fair circuit and representing artists in more conventional settings. But from what I understand, and you'll tell us, you were increasingly frustrated by the constraints and the restraints, as we heard from Ralph earlier, that these different kinds of partnerships can maybe put on the artist and on the producer. And so you decided to strike out on your own. So please tell us about that journey and how that journey kind of reflects the way the art world has evolved.
Well, it all began in, I guess, around 2002, 2003, where I happened to sit next to someone I knew, but not very well, called Thomas Dane. And I think it was at a dinner that Art Angel gave for Steve McQueen, who had just produced this rather extraordinary artwork called Western Deep, Carib's Leap. And we ended up sitting next to each other, and he said, "What are you doing?" And at the time, I was actually working with an internet startup, bizarrely enough, called iStorm. which was not very satisfactory. And I said, well, I'm doing that, but really, you know. And he said, well, Steve McQueen is looking for representation in London, and Thomas at the time was a consultant. He was an art advisor, very in demand and very elegant art advisor. And he said, but you know, then we're going to need a space. And I said, I mean, that can't be very hard. None of us had worked in a gallery before, although he had, I think, a little early on. Anyway, we eventually opened the gallery there were 3 partners at the time, and my task was to work with Steve. And that was a great joy and a great privilege. And for the next X number of years, I had to somehow conjure this magic, which was he had an idea, or there was a museum show, or there was a gallery show, and there was no work. And he'd have an idea, and then he'd say, well, that's what I want to do. And I then had to go out and find the money, find the partners, because fledgling galleries, I can tell you right now, don't have the money to fund production. They just don't. We certainly didn't at the time. And so I started to realize that in order to make something exist in the world, I had to start to think of it as a kind of 3-dimensional puzzle of money and time and partnerships.
Ideas.
Sorry?
Idea. It's coming from the idea. But
It's coming from an idea. And so I did that on a number of occasions to produce these works. And they were very much embedded in what I would call the art world. So there were works that were mostly, in fact, almost exclusively sold to institutions. So not only did I have to find the money to make the work, but I had to find the money to buy the work for the museums who are also penniless. So these were kind of long arc adventures. And meanwhile, my partners were doing exactly what I guess Mark referred to earlier. They were feeding the art market with, I think, extremely high quality painting and sculpture. But the rate of their transactions was 10 times more than mine. I could say probably. And I was very, very aware of that kind of bifurcation, which again we referred to earlier on, which is the painting and sculpture world, which is really embedded in the commercial art market, and then this other thing, which is, in my case, it was video, but also because I started to develop the know-how to build these 3-dimensional puzzles, I was the one who was given everything you had to plug in, everything that was complicated, everything you had to raise money for, and I became the moving image lady, but also the installation lady and everything else. I had a kind of moment of a eureka moment, I think, and it was between Steve McQueen making his first feature film, which I was witness to but not involved in, and his second one, and his world had exploded. It had exploded in the sense that he was no longer dealing with the art world. He was dealing with his whole other world, which is the world of commercial cinema. And suddenly I felt I had sort of, in a way, lost him, although he did continue to make artworks, but I'd lost him to this other world that I didn't know and I didn't really understand. But what was also interesting is that he developed a relationship with a film agent. And this film agent was promoting him not just in feature film production, but also in these other worlds like commercials. Not that he's done very many, but it gave me this sort of, oh my God, there's this other world out there. And why have I been doing all the work for the last 12 years when actually someone's just walked in and does deals that are substantially more lucrative than the ones that we were doing? So it kind of gave me it gave me a bit of a shock. And in fact, I did go back to the gallery and I said, I have this incredible idea. Why don't we develop a management agency, which I will run, which will sit in the umbrella of the gallery, and I will go out and bring in partners from these adjacent fields, which are, at the time it was cinema, but then there's also fashion, there's all sorts of other kind of commercial industries, and so on. I didn't get very far. But that was the moment when I thought the infrastructure of the gallery is no longer sufficient for the representation of a certain kind of artist. And that certain kind of artist is, we can call it immaterial, but it's all the ones I referred to earlier, people working in film, in video, in kind of simulation, gaming technology, installation in general, basically things that are hard to sell. And I eventually left the gallery, really because I felt I was very, very committed to this type of artist, and I felt that there was another way of doing this. I spent 4 years, I was kind of kidnapped into a quite remarkable film project called DAO, which is infamous, I think, probably is a good word. But what was interesting about that film project was that in a way it was a kind of extraordinary creation of a young Russian filmmaker that had lasted 12 years. And I was working on the last 4 years of this project. But two things hit me. One is that suddenly I was working with film editors, sound people, religious leaders, governments, dancers, shaman, and I was like, oh my God, this world is just, it's way bigger than I thought. And in this occasion, something very unique is that this whole thing, which cost many, 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 many tens of millions of dollars, was funded by one person. So I had, in this case, I was witnessing the extraordinary insight and vision of a patron, because I can tell you this was not a commercial project, of a patron following the vision of an artist over time, no matter what. Now, that's something I haven't seen a lot before, but I'll come back to that later, because I think that there's something in this. So I came out of that film 4 years later, and then it was just COVID was looming, and I thought, oh my God, what do I do now? I mean, I'm technically unemployable because I've seen, I'm not unemployable in the art world because I've kind of seen too much. I've seen
how the sausage is made.
Sorry?
You've seen how
I've
the
seen how
sausage
sausages are made. More that I've seen the possibilities of what lies outside it, and I would feel too confined in the art world.
Yeah.
So I started this thing called MDAC, which really, it's because I thought if I try to think of a name, it'll take me 3 years. So I'm just going to call it this. I don't even know when I started what it was, but it was really the fulfillment of this vision that I have, that a certain kind of artist really needs someone running around the world building these three-dimensional puzzles for them, independent of their work with the galleries. So the artists that I work with have galleries. They're artists who are really at the top of their game. They supply objects to galleries for art fairs and for gallery shows. But really, what they're turned on by is the thing that they dream of that's not that. And so I started working with Philippe Parreno, who is a French artist of a certain renown, who has shown in every museum you could possibly imagine, and really has a kind of itch to do something else. And so we started working on an opera. We started working on a feature film, and in the feature film, we're halfway through production. We've worked on very, very large scale. In fact, the biggest one in the world just happened a few months ago. Fashion shows for Vuitton. I continued to work with John Gerard, who is someone I worked with at Thomas Dane, and we worked together on the U2 concert in the Sphere. And to do that, I had to really abandon my ideas of what was good art, or what was, and I really went like completely the other way to this like super, super popular thing, which was the U2 concerts, the U2 series of concerts at the Sphere in Vegas, which, by the way, also involved really extraordinary technology. You should look it up because it's almost unheard of. Anyway, I've kind of been unleashed into this world where I work with artists, and only artists that I really feel passionate about, so that I can, because it takes passion, this stuff. It's complicated and it's hard. But to kind of bring them into the world and float them into these adjacencies where they can work in collaboration with other kinds of people And I'm very interested in collaboration. I'm very interested in that moment where you take a master of what we call the art world and put them in a different place, a kind of uncomfortable place, which is being slightly scared and not knowing how to do it quite the same, because artists become repetitive as they become well-known and professionalized. And I'm very interested in the state of innocence, or what we call candor in French, particularly when they're working with people at a very, very high level in a completely different discipline, whether that be science or music or anything else. So that's kind of where I am.
So sounds to me like you not only help them realize their own vision, but you actually bring more and different kinds of opportunities, really, to the table for them. I think the phrase you used yesterday, which I loved, was you help make the impossible possible.
Yeah, but mostly because I'm not interested in making things that have ever been done before. I don't see the point of that. I don't think artists are either, if they're really alive to what's going on around them. Also, I like difficulty for reasons I don't understand, and I like this idea of imminence. This idea of being on the cusp of something which may or may not work. I think I've abandoned the idea of what a successful work of art is. Because going back to what we were saying earlier about process in museums, I'm interested in the imminence of the moment where we'll go, we're here, and that to me is the most exciting thing.
What's interesting to me is that it takes so much creativity, actually. I mean, what you do is super creative. I mean, you're an artist in your own right. I think bringing all these different elements together. So I'm going to turn to our artist here now, Jay Bach, which I'm sure many of you in the audience know is both an artist and a professor at Seoul National University College of Fine Arts. He's also, I learned, a founding member of the Artificial Intelligence Art Research Center. So when I was doing a bit of research on your background and some recent interviews you gave, I saw that you grew up in a Buddhist household. And one of the questions that you would hear over and over again is that you would reflect upon, how am I connected to the world and to what extent? Which I think is an interesting way for framing all of this. And one of the works that came to mind, which I think we're going to be showing, it's not this one, a different one, Memory of Color, is just an example of that, creating abstract paintings and poetry. I'll let you explain it, but using AI in the process of your art. So there's no question that you are creating new paradigms, what we've been talking about all day. My question to you is, from the artist's perspective, what's the appropriate ecosystem that can help make that happen and help bring your work to life? Is it a model that Martine is talking about? Are there other kinds of models that you've been able to explore and sort of capitalize upon? If you could speak a little about that, that would be great.
Thank you. 안녕하세요. 저는 미디어 아티스트이자 서울대학교에서 학생들을 가르치고 있는 박재성이라고 하고요. 아까 소개해 주셔서 감사드립니다. 우선은 이 필스 기간에 이런 어떤 정말 전 세계에서 미술인들이 한국으로 오는 시기에 이 다음 패러다임에 대해서 논의를 할 수 있는 자리를 만들어 주신 이준 대표님 이하 SUUM 분들과 그리고 DDP 디자인 재단 분들께 진심으로 감사드리고요. 제가 또 너무나 고민하고 있는 어떤 그런 내용들이라 그 요청이 왔을 때 저도 너무나 흔쾌히 그리고 기꺼이 이렇게 같이 참여를 했습니다. 저는 아트 앤 테크놀로지 영역에서 작가로 활동을 하면서 또 학생들을 가르치고 있기 때문에 그런 측면에서 제가 하는 영역은 항상 뭔가 굉장히 모호한 영역들이었던 것 같아요. 그리고 제가 다루는 기술이라든가 때로는 어떤 게임을 가지고 작업을 하기도 하고, 그리고 감각을 받아들이는 센서들을 활용해가지고 또 작업을 만들기도 하고, 또 3D 프린팅이나 메타버스 기술을 활용해가지고 작업을 하기도 하고, 최근에는 또 AI를 활용해서 아까 연구센터도 만들고 그리고 작업도 진행을 하고 있는데요. DDP에서 럭스전을 통해서 선보인 바 있는 작업도 지금 진행을 계속 이어서 하고 있습니다.
I'm sorry
그래서
to interrupt, but could you pause for a moment just to give your interpreter a chance to summarize? Thank you, otherwise, for her sake.
Thank you. I'll be interpreting what he, I'm sorry, translating what J. Park just told. As an art, he's a media artist at SNU, and since he wants to say thank you to the SUUM project and DDP for giving him this chance to talk about his work and what he has been thinking of regarding his practice and overall of art and technology. Also, he has been working with a lot of mediums such as 3D printing, meta, AI, and so on. But I feel like the definition of art and technology is so undefined yet. So while he's still working for the Lux show and the DDP's media facade, he would still like to know what would be the way to figure this out.
그래서 제가 작업을 하면서 앞서 말씀드린 여러 가지 기술을 활용하기 위해서는 또 굉장히 여러 전문가들과 협업을 하게 되고 그런 그 협업을 할 때마다 굉장히 소통하는 방식에 대해서도 새롭게 배워가면서 진행을 하게 되고요. 뭐 공학자들 사실은 대부분 지금 제가 협업을 하고 있는 분들은 공학자 분들이신데 때로는 또 음악가 분들, 때로는 배우나 어떤 공연에 계신 분들과 다양한 협업들을 하면서 그런 예술의 어떤 그런 장르라든가 매체라든가 이런 것들이 굉장히 규정하기 어려운 방식으로 확장되고 또 변화하고 있다는 것을 몸소 프랙티스를 하는 작가로서 느끼고 있고요. 또 한 가지는 예술가의 역할 또한 계속 다양한 좌표에서 변해가고 있다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 저는 제가 지금 DDP에서 아마 여러분들 오늘 밤에도 8일까지 진행되고 있는 서울라이트 행사에 CAC라는 작품, 인비테이션이라는 작품을 통해서 지금 또 미디어 파사드 작품을 선보이고 있는데 그 작품을 보시면 그 작품에서는 사실 제가 작가로서 2021년도에 했던 어떤 그런 역할과는 달리 또 연출 감독으로서의 또 역할을 또 진행하고 있거든요. 그래서 이런 예술가의 역할도 굉장히 다양한 포지션에서 다양한 분들과 협업을 해서 자신의 어떤 비전을 만들어가는 방식으로 변화하고 있는 것 같습니다.
Since I work with a lot of people as a collaboration, it incorporates a lot of engineers, especially mechanics, and some coders and some musicians as well. So it's basically limitless to this art and technology field that I can incorporate with. Also, I think what artist has to do has been expanded a lot as well, because not only I have to make a work of art, but also have to direct and make the vision visible to other people.
So in a way, you're becoming your own producer, but I'm sure you work with many others as well to realize your vision. One just little follow-up question I want to ask is, because I know you worked on the LG OLED project. It's one of your amazing works that we're seeing some of those here, and also DDP as well. I know some of that requires some, obviously, corporate funding. Are there some challenges inherent in that, or some limitations that you feel as an artist when you're producing the works, or do you feel complete freedom to do what you wish? Or maybe it gives you more freedom because there is more money available.
제가 제 스스로가 프로듀서이기도 하다고 말씀을 주셨는데 사실 저는 보다 아티스트의 그 맞는 말씀이면서도 또 굉장히 마르틴 같은 또 프로듀서가 굉장히 필요하다는 생각을 네, 늘 하면서 네, 그 작업을 하는 것 같습니다. 지금 말씀 주신 LG 올레드 프로젝트는 제가 숨과도 그 런던에서 진행을 했었고 그 외에도 다양한 프로젝트의 기업과 협업을 했었는데 그 저는 사실은 어떻게 보면 어떤 면에서는 그러니까 훨씬 더 자유로움을 준다고 생각을 하고 있거든요. 기업 펀딩이라는 게 사실은 기업이 물론 어떤 뭐 그 제품에서 보여주고 싶은 부분이나 그리고 또 그 뭐 어떤 브랜드의 어떤 비전 같은 부분들을 가지고 있지만 제가 경험한 어떤 프로젝트들에서는 사실은 훨씬 그 작가들의 어떤 그런 비전을 표현할 수 있도록 서포트하는 쪽으로 특히나 이제 제가 뭐 현대자동차라든가 LG전자라든가 이런 어떤 뭐 좋은 또 그런 비전을 가진 회사들과 일을 해서 그럴 수도 있겠지만 네, 그런 측면에서 굉장히 어떤 면에서는 미술관과 갤러리에서 작업을 하는 것만큼 그러니까 혹은 또 훨씬 더 그 제약 없이 그 자유롭게 서포트를 받으면서 작업을 할 수 있었던 것 같고요. 그래서
Maybe pause for a second because she won't be able to get all of that in.
Thank you so much. Not only I'm sorry. Oh yeah, that might be actually better.
So I can sit. So basically, what the Chebag was trying to say, I mean, he's working, I mean, as an artist, as a principal, but sometimes, I mean, he can work as an artistic director, also producer of the project. So, I mean, Seoul Light project this time, it is, I mean, his, I mean, direction, I mean, for producing the whole project. But at the same time, for your second questions, and what he was trying to say was, his experience with the corporation was much more opened, more than he expected. So once the, I mean, corporations start to understand the great trust, I mean, if they have with the artist, they really allowed artists to carry on what they need and what they can do further. Sometimes, I mean, the technology, I mean, company provide, oh, this can be possible and not. So, I mean, that was his case. Sorry.
Thank you, Jiyoon. And actually, we touched on that this morning. I remember Marcelo, and I can't remember if it was Marcelo or Hans Ulrich, talked about this question of trust. And once the funder, trusts the artist or trusts the producer that they're working with, then everything is actually much easier. Doesn't always work that way, I know, in the real world, but that's the ideal. So Pearl, I'm going to turn to Pearl, but we'll come back to you, don't worry. So Pearl, your gallery, as everyone knows, I think it's on. It should be on already. Oh. Yeah. Yes. You're live. It's been a mainstay on the international art scene since 2005, I believe. And you've been supporting both Chinese and international artists. I noticed there's a recent focus on African artists, which is very interesting. Creating intercultural dialogue. So you've had a front row seat to the shift to more immersive, digital-based, also more ephemeral works.
Actually, because I started also with a design gallery, so I always have a production team. So even with, we're talking about Studios Wine, A. Murakami, who now has a show in M+, just opened on the 29th of August. We started together when they freshly graduated with Royal College. So we funded it, of course. When you are, when you're fresh graduate, we at the time we have an artist residence, so they stay there for 6 months. They create the first project is called Highway. So immediately they got awards. Immediately we sold to the V&A Museum. It's still going on, that project, but they are very lucky in many ways. They know how to promote themselves. It was pretty easy because initially, when we were doing the project, like the Highway, the mind wasn't even thinking about making money, making profit. And now, after all these years, they understand the values because they could not survive at all. So brands are coming to work with them, and they have a free. I mean, they were pretty. They have freedom to do what they want. And recent project where we opened a show during COVID time, we still pay for the production, but then we loaned it to the museum. We got loan fee from some Chinese museums. So some of the artists, we do very different things with them. I mean, this show in Amplus called The Floating World is a huge project. So they talk about, they have floating clouds going into, floating bubbles rain, fog rain, into a digital rain. And then you can walk into a room with bubble clouds. So you see the clouds touching and then it disappeared, because they were very interested. Not about screams like Mark Speaker was talking about screams. They like materials that in flipping moments it disappeared. It's like Buddhism, we talk about impermanence.
Ephemeral tech, I think they call it, right? Ephemeral
Yes,
tech.
it's really
phrase.
beautiful about it. But we are also looking at, there are artists, because we're galleries, we cannot always support artists. So there are immersive art that we're working with artists that is in gallery context. So like we have this, we talk about African artists, a Nigerian artist who has this idea of writing in imaginary biographies. So he paints a life of himself, of 7 other individuals. So he narrates about this biography, and with the music of each tribes. So he paints, he does immersive, and he gives experience of every visitors coming in, looking at the different art.
You were talking a lot about at lunch about the immersive experience, but you took issue, I thought it was very interesting, with towards the immaterial. And you said, in fact, it's not only the immaterial.
Because I really have a problem when you talk about dematerialization, immaterial, and material, because I think it's so passé. I mean, we're talking about 60s, 70s. We talk about dematerialization. We're talking about conceptual art. I mean, of course, conceptual art is important, but we're looking at a generation, Gen Z. I mean, Gen Z, most of the Gen Z that I know of, or the general public, they won't really appreciate conceptual art. Today we are talking about art and audience. We are talking relational about art and audience. Many of these immersive art, or many of these experiential art, it's the audience who makes the artwork meaningful. Yeah. It's not in art critics. So I think that this is the trend. So are we going to take this trend, give experience to this younger generation, enticing them to come and visit the museum? It's a big question mark now.
Well, and it's actually engaging with the artwork.
Exactly. I think it's really important to engage a general public. Recently, and we have the show with Mr. Dudo, who's working with the Holborn Museum. So he has a projection on the facade of the Holborn Museum. And it was pretty amazing because it engaged the whole general public, going there, looking at them and at the facade. And the outcome of that was, here's a solo show that all different ages, from teenagers to early 30s, all of a sudden they have a new audience, new visitors going in. Of course, the tickets, because museum needs ticketing. So the ticketing went exploded. And gift shop. The gift shop, they were making money out of the gift shop. What makes the museum was very happy is they can now engage a younger generation of visitors.
Which means more visitors.
More
translates into
visitors,
more
and
ticket
also
sales, more
make them
sales to the bookshop.
engaged. And also they look at the older, the conceptual art in a different way, because at least they can attract them coming in.
So that's one possible funding model. is
Yes,
the ticket sales,
absolutely.
But it was also interesting because you talked about that it isn't completely immaterial. There is this concept of there is something that you
Of
as
course,
a gallerist
of course,
can
of
sell,
course.
which I thought was really interesting.
Let's say, going back to Murakami, they create smaller, because what is happening about the art and technology? They're so big, most of the projects. So you really need institution to buy it. So what they did is they make smaller pieces where in the gallery we can still sell them. So this will give them an income. This will help the gallery to support them. So I think this is, every artist has their different way of engaging with the public and also to make it commercial.
Thank you. And Martine, I'm going back to you because you're doing some of this, but outside of the gallery structure or adjacent to it, as you said. So could you give us maybe a few more examples of how you've recouped your costs? Because you may have,
I don't pay for anything.
Sure, you're not paying
So I don't
for
have
it.
to recoup. And I think that that's fundamental to the way that I want to work. The question is, whose money do we spend, and what is the deal? And I guess it varies. Like you were talking about models in museums and funding models. There is no such thing as a model in this. We make it up every single time. It depends on the stature of the artist. It depends on the nature of the work. It also depends, sometimes artists are approached by brands and other commercial entities. And then the question is, can we get to a place in which the kind of, the intentions of that brand and the intentions of the artist meet somewhere which is beautiful, not just beautiful, but meaningful. So there is no such thing as a model. I have a fantasy, and my fantasy goes a bit like this. When you're extremely wealthy, and you're of the older generation, and you have your 10 houses that are full of Jeff Koons, and you have 10 warehouses that are full of painting and sculpture, at what point, or at one point, is there not a moment where you say, you know what, I have enough stuff. Really what I want to focus on is me. And really what I'm interested in is actually spending the next 10 million on having a really interesting, conceptually complex adventure with an artist over time, going back to the model that I talked to before, and that in a way is what you're buying. I'm really interested in that idea. I've seen it happen, and it's quite extraordinary, and I think the satisfaction for the person who is spending the money is immense, if they're a certain kind of person.
So it's sort of nurturing the career, but being involved.
Nurturing yourself.
And yourself.
This is like a selfish act to give an artist that you really admire, who really can make you think, can take you to places you've never thought about, have never been to, conceptual and geographic places. This is really about, someone of a very, very high level who's made it in business, meeting someone who's at a very high level, in another milieu, in another world. And it, goes back a little bit to what Ralph was saying about
Burning Man.
About technology, about what it is to sit with technologists. People who are collecting art often are people who have achieved extremely great things in business, in finance, in engineering, and so on. They can think at a very high level. And if they have the money, why not play that game with an artist? And an artwork may or may not come out of it, but it probably is not an object. It probably is a system, or it probably could be anything. So I'm very interested in that sort of thing.
Fascinating.
I also, if I may add, for example, in the funding of this feature film, so it's a feature film by a great artist, And so we're funding it privately because we don't want to sell territories before we, but we're not funding it on an art world model, meaning that the investors who each take a share in an LLC in LA, they do not get an artwork as a kind of thank you. What they get is the possibility of investing in an artwork that's going to appear in another market, which is the commercial film market. And really, I'm like, how different is that from the fractional ownership of an artwork? Because it has an exit strategy, because the film will be released, and they get their money back. They may or may not make a profit, but why is that more risky than buying a share in an artwork in which the market is way more unpredictable than, you could argue, than the independent film business? So,
super creative way of thinking, but I love your idea of, you know, an investor or somebody, but for their own nurturing, their own potentially creativity, but challenging themselves as well. I want to make sure we get to education because you're a professor and have been for a number of years. And you think a lot about, of course, about the next generation. So how do you see young artists fitting into this new ecosystem? And what role does the university or other structures might play in the education of the artist, preparing them for this new ecosystem?
저는 제가 그 교육자로서 교육계에 있기 때문에 그런 다음 패러다임이 또 다음 그 새로운 어떤 아티스트들을 원하는가, 또 어떤 작품들을 원하고 또 어떤 활동들을 하게 할 것인가 하는 부분에 대해서 굉장히 관심이 많고 고민을 많이 하고 노력을 하고 있는데요. 제가 사실은 최근에 이제 조금 저희 석사 과정에 있는 학생과 이야기를 나누면서 미술계와의 긴장을 유지를 해라. 미술계에 그 잡아먹히지 않도록 노력해라라고 이야기를 했던 기억이 납니다. 그거는 그 미술계가 원하는 방식으로 혹은 어떤 미술계가 기대하는 방식이 아니라 정말 그 지금 세대들이 어떤 표현하고자 하는 방식을 자유롭게 다루고 오히려 미술계가 전형적으로 이제 기대하는 바를 거부하거나 혹은 거기서부터 자유로울 수 있을 때 새로운 작업이 나올 수 있을 거라고 이야기를 했었고요.
Yes, one of the point in my education, what I am sharing with my student, they are much younger generation, and he always say that don't be really seized by the art world itself, because if you really, producing something which can be expected by the art world, by somebody who believe, this is art and this is not, then, this is not the right direction you have to walk into. So we are really, trying to think openly and widely. That's what we are saying.
그래서 저도 그런 측면에서 정말 어떻게 보면은 제가 이런 프로젝트를 했을 때 저에게 기대하는 어떤 다음 프로젝트, 그럼 이 아티스트는 이제 이런 거 해나가겠구나를 항상 그게 가장 큰 저의 챌린지라고 생각하고 거기서부터 자유롭거나 혹은 더 나아가기 위해서 굉장히 노력을 했던 것 같고요. 그런 지금의 어떤 다음 세대들 같은 경우에는 특히나 저희 교수나 시스템보다도 훨씬 더 자유롭게 지금 미디어나 여러 가지 경험들을 한 세대이기 때문에 그 경험에 충실하게 또 표현을 해나가는 게 굉장히 중요하다고 생각합니다. 사실은 저도 교육계에 있지만 교육이나 그런 여러 가지 시스템들은 이 훨씬 더 경직되어 있는 경우들을 많이 보게 되거든요. 저희도 그걸 더 훨씬 유연하게 만들려고 굉장히 노력을 하고 있지만.
Okay, I'm kind of lost in translation, but I know that most of the audience is Korean, so you understood. But for our colleagues in English, if I can summarize it a little bit, that as myself, I also do not want to plunge into the art world, art making. Also, I don't want to make any sort of artwork which can be expected by the audience. Oh, this is Jebak, who's making this kind of similar stuff, I might say. So, that is the questions to myself, but at the same time to the student. And also, the Seoul National University is one of the university in Korea, also setting up the media arts department as a BA level, which is really, well promising, I believe. I hope, if it goes well, I mean, in the end. So in that aspect, they're really trying to be flexible as possible as they can.
Thank you. I want to turn to Pearl because I know you had some thoughts on education too, and the idea that education, that the future of education might be the function as a function of an archive. So maybe you can expand on that. And think of questions, by the way, because we're going to have a few minutes, I hope, for questions. So be thinking of them.
I will ask Jay. Jay, do you have archiving? Do you have archiving for the student? Because I think for the education, archiving is really important for them to research. So especially with new art, it's all about ideas, right? But ideas is ideas. It's about representation of new ideas. So is what you have, do you have an archive for the student to research?
I think that's a very important question and important role of the maybe university. But I think we have a Museum of Art in Seoul National University, and that museum have the role of archiving, I think, and they are trying to expand their how can I say their collections, like media art and then installation art and then some new form of art. So I mean, university also I think have a responsibility to archive students' ideas and then students' work and everything. But it's very difficult to have that to do the role in budget wise, and also we need some specialist for archiving as well. So I think I agree with your
don't you
opinion.
think that the university first thing in order to do a course, they should have the fundamentals, which is archive.
Right. I think that's very important opinion. I agree with that.
I'm opinionated, sorry.
It's interesting because earlier today, Hans Ulrich was talking about the idea as an institution, as an archive as well. So it's a related concept. We have time for a couple of questions. If anyone has one, you can introduce yourself and maybe say who it's directed to. Any questions? Don't be shy. Okay, well, we'll go on. We only have a few more minutes, actually.
I have something to add.
Okay, go right ahead, Martine.
I wanted to add also that we happen to be about to witness one of the greatest transfers of wealth ever in the history of time. And one of the characteristics of this new generation seems to be a refusal of material things. And people don't want cars anymore. They probably don't even want their own house anymore. They want to kind of pop into. And I wonder what that means for the art world. And I wonder whether it feeds into my fantasy of what about a young 25-year-old who's just inherited 100 million or 200 million or 3 trillion, doing that very selfish thing of choosing an artist that they revere and going on an adventure with them, no matter what.
And that's fantastic, and it's all about, as we were saying earlier, the experience. This trend towards experiences and personalizing the experience of art. So I think that's where
You
we're
really have
headed.
to think about a 25 years old, what do they see art as?
It's a very good question.
I mean, this is really, I think all of us has to really give art the meaning, because it's art about empowerment. I always say that our mission, as of today, of the art world, is to empower the young.
Well, I think you empower the young by making them think, and by giving them curiosity. And I think that's probably the biggest gift you can give a young person.
I see that Hilde has a comment or question. I'd love to hear it. Here we go. And we get to hear from her very soon.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking soon anyway, so get used to the sound of this voice. Okay, I'm really loving this whole panel, but I want to iterate on something that you're talking about, Martine, and it's maybe not a question, but a confirmation. So I used to own an art gallery in Los Angeles, and I don't come from money at all whatsoever. And but I studied art for 7 years, and I'm an artist. And a very dear friend of mine who inherited McDonald's money, so we're talking big, big money, came to me and he said, you know, I thought about going to art school. And then he said, but then I thought, what if we opened an art gallery and you just taught me about art by showing me what it's like to live in art? Wow. And we did that for 2 years. And he used to, joke that working with me was like walking around inside my brain on LSD every day. And we got to work with dozens, if not hundreds of artists, and it was incredible. It was mind-breaking for me, and it was mind-breaking for him. Now, Jerry Gagosian, a conceptual art project. My name is not Jerry Gagosian. My name is Hildy. I'm in a new phase of it. And actually, I have an investor. And my investor, I believe, because he's made enough money, is selfishly going on a wild trip with me. And I just want to say that I 100% agree with this vision, and I do think, they talk about Starbucks, like how Starbucks now can predict the time, the place, how you're going to want everything algorithmically. Like you'll just walk in, you won't speak to anyone, you pick up your coffee. Everything is becoming customizable. And I think when this wealth transfer happens, which is like $72 trillion, this is what they're going to want. And it's already happening, by the way. So I just wanted to confirm.
But and again, maybe the idea of a collection could be this number of projects you're doing with a number of artists, and that's your collection. You want to come and talk about my collection? That's what you talk about.
So that is the perfect transition, because we see that this vision that Martine has is already happening, and so hopefully it will happen more and more. And it's also a perfect segue to Hildy, because she is going to be doing our final provocation of the day. There's a reason we're calling it a provocation, as her alter ego, Jerry Gagosian. So, and thank you so much to the panelists. This was a great conversation. We have much more we could say, but you can grab them afterwards.